They thought he was just another scout, quiet, unassuming, no gun at his hip. That was their first mistake. When the Red Vultures ambushed the wagon train that spring morning, they expected the usual chaos of screaming settlers and scattered resistance. Instead, they found Sam Walker waiting for them. Before he vanished 15 years ago, they called him the Phantom Blade. His knives found their marks with impossible precision, turning circus performances into displays of deadly art. But after one tragic night, the legend disappeared, leaving only whispered stories and unanswered questions. Now, as 30 armed outlaws surround the trapped settlers, Sam Walker stands calmly in their midst. What the Red Vultures don't realize is that every breath they take brings them closer to understanding why hardened men still speak his name in hushed tones. Because Sam Walker didn't just come to guide these settlers west, he came to remind the territories why some legends are written in blood, and his knives never miss. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Dawn broke over the sprawling campground as wagon wheels creaked and horses nickered softly. The morning air carried the mingled scents of wood smoke and coffee as families prepared for their westward journey. Sarah Thompson knelt beside her daughter Emma's makeshift bed in their wagon, pressing a cool cloth to the child's fevered forehead. "Just a few more days of rest, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "The doctor says you're getting stronger every day." She glanced anxiously at the gathering crowd of settlers, knowing their departure couldn't be delayed much longer. Nearby, old James Wilson sat on a fallen log with his grandson Tommy, patiently explaining the workings of a Winchester rifle. "Now remember, boy," he said, his weathered hands steady on the weapon. "Respect the gun like you'd respect a rattler. Both can keep you alive, but both can turn deadly if you're careless." The bustling preparations halted as a lone figure approached, on horseback. The stranger's arrival sent a ripple of whispers through the crowd. He rode with an easy grace, his dark coat dusty from the trail. Without fanfare, he dismounted and nodded to the gathered settlers. "Sam Walker," he introduced himself. Simply, "Heard you folks were looking for a scout." His voice was quiet, but carried across the morning air with authority. The settlers studied him, lean, watchful, with eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He didn't wear a gun belt like most men, which drew curious glances from the settlers. Eli Carter pushed through the crowd, his broad shoulders and confident stride marking him as the group's self-appointed leader. "Walker, is it? Got any references?" "6 years guiding wagons across 3 territories," Sam replied evenly. "Last group I led is settling nicely in Missouri. You can check with them if you'd like, though that might delay your departure by a few weeks." A slight smile touched his lips as Eli shifted uncomfortably. They both knew the settlers were eager to move out before winter caught them on the trail. Sam's experience showed in the way he read the situation and the people, with the relative calm of the morning shattered as Timothy Brooks's wagon wheel cracked with a sharp report. The loaded wagon listed dangerously, threatening to spill its precious cargo of supplies. Before anyone could react, Sam was there, his movements swift and sure. "Mr. Brooks, got any spare lumber?" Sam asked, already examining the damage. "And someone bring me a saw and hammer." He worked efficiently, showing Timothy how to reinforce the wheel properly. Other settlers gathered to watch, and Sam took the time to explain the technique. Out on the trail, a broken wheel can mean death. Best everyone knows how to handle repairs. As the morning wore on, settlers began sharing stories around the breakfast fires. Martha Jenkins, her gray hair tucked neatly under a bonnet, spoke in hushed tones about the Red Vultures. "Heard they hit another wagon train last month. Left. No survivors, just burning wagons," and she trailed off, glancing at the children nearby. James Wilson watched Sam from across the fire, a thoughtful expression on his lined face. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he held his peace, merely nodding respectfully when Sam caught his gaze. The scout's presence had already begun to affect the group dynamics. Some, like young Billy Peterson, were drawn to his quiet competence. The boy trailed after Sam as he checked the wagons, asking endless questions about the trail ahead. "What's the worst thing you've seen out there, Mr. Walker?" Billy asked, clutching his prized possession, a small hunting knife his father had given him. Sam paused in his inspection of a harness. "Carelessness," he answered finally. "That's what kills most folks on the trail." He nodded toward Billy's knife. "That's a fine blade you have there. Balance is key with a knife, just like with most things in life." Billy's eyes lit up as Sam showed him how to hold the knife properly, demonstrating with subtle movements that spoke of years of expertise. The boy didn't notice the distant look that crossed Sam's face as he handled the blade, or the way his fingers moved with practiced precision. Later that afternoon, Sam rode ahead to scout the immediate trail. He returned with news that brought a shadow over the camp, a burnt-out wagon just a few miles ahead. The destruction was methodical, professional. Sam described the scene in careful detail to Eli, who dismissed the warning with a wave of his hand. "Probably just another group of fools who didn't know how to handle themselves," Eli declared. "We've got 30 able-bodied men and enough guns to handle any trouble. We're not changing course." Sam's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. "Your call," he said quietly. But there were signs of at least 15 riders. They knew what they were doing. The exchange created an undercurrent of tension that lingered through the evening. As darkness fell, worried conversations circled the campfires. Parents held their children closer, and men checked their weapons with extra care. Sam sat apart from the main groups, his back against a wagon wheel. The firelight caught the metallic glint of a small blade in his hands as he carefully honed its edge. His eyes remained fixed on the darkness beyond the camp's perimeter, scanning for movement. Billy approached cautiously, drawn by the rhythmic sound of stone on steel. "Mr. Walker, Pa says we should all stay close to the fires tonight." Sam nodded, not pausing in his work. "Your Pa's right, Billy. Best head back now." The boy hesitated. "Those men who burned the wagon, they're still out there, aren't they?" Sam's hands stilled. He looked at Billy, measuring his words carefully. "There's always something out there, Billy. That's why we stay alert." He gestured toward the fires. "Go on now. Your family needs you." As Billy trudged back to his wagon, Sam resumed his vigilant watch. His fingers traced the edge of the blade with practiced familiarity, testing its sharpness. The haunted look in his eyes deepened as he stared into the flames, as if seeing shadows of his past dancing in their depths. Throughout the night, Sam made regular circuits of the camp, his footsteps silent on the prairie grass. He paused occasionally, listening to the wind and the distant cries of coyotes. During one such round, he noticed movement on a distant ridge, a shadow that didn't belong. By the time he reached the spot, whoever had been watching was long gone, leaving only scattered pebbles and a half-smoked cigarette as evidence of their presence. Dawn approached with agonizing slowness. The first hints of light revealed Sam still at his post, another small blade lying beside him. His expression was grim as he watched the sun rise over the eastern horizon. He knew what was coming, had known since he'd seen the burnt wagon. The only question was whether the settlers would be ready when trouble finally found them. The camp began to stir as morning light filtered through the wagon canvas. Sarah Thompson's daughter, Emma's fever had finally broken, bringing relief to the worried mother. James Wilson cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision, watching Sam with knowing eyes. Eli Carter strode through the camp, issuing orders with his usual authority, pointedly ignoring the scout's presence. Sam remained where he was, seemingly relaxed but alert. His fingers absently traced the outline of a concealed sheath sewn into his coat. To most observers, he appeared unarmed, exactly as he preferred. Experience had taught him that people feared obvious weapons far more than hidden ones. The morning air carried a heavy stillness that Sam recognized all too well. Birds had stopped singing, and the prairie wind held its breath. He knew they were no longer alone on the vast grassland. Somewhere out there, hidden eyes were watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As the sun climbed higher, Sam's thoughts turned to the decisions that had led him here. He'd sworn never to use his skills again, yet here he was, responsible for the lives of dozens of innocent settlers. The weight of that responsibility settled around his shoulders like a familiar burden. The camp bustled with activity as families prepared for another day of travel. Children laughed and played between the wagons, women gathered supplies for breakfast, and men discussed the route ahead. None of them noticed the subtle signs that Sam saw clearly: the distant dust clouds that didn't match the wind, the occasional glint of metal from the surrounding hills. Billy appeared again, offering Sam a cup of coffee. The scout accepted with a nod of thanks, his eyes never ceasing their careful scan of the horizon. The boy lingered, clearly wanting to ask more questions, but sensing Sam's preoccupation. "Mr. Walker?" Billy finally ventured. "How do you know where danger is before it happens?" Sam took a slow sip of coffee before answering. "You learn to read the signs, Billy. Everything leaves traces. You just have to know where to look." He pointed to a distant hill where prairie dogs stood alertly, by their burrows. "See how they're watching? They know something's wrong." The morning wore on, and Sam's unease grew. He made one final attempt to convince Eli to change their route, but the leader's pride wouldn't allow him to appear cautious in front of the eye. "Settlers, we're not running scared from shadows, Walker," Eli declared firmly. "These people trusted me to get them west, and that's exactly what we're going to do." Sam didn't argue further. Instead, he began making subtle preparations, suggesting where families should position their wagons, quietly advising the more level-headed settlers to keep their weapons close, and memorizing the terrain around them. His movements were unhurried, but purposeful, like a man setting up pieces on a chessboard. As the sun reached its zenith, Sam found a quiet moment to sharpen his last hidden blade. The familiar routine helped calm his mind as he prepared for what he knew was coming. The weight of his knives, carefully concealed around his body, provided cold comfort. He'd hoped never to use them again, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Day's heat began to build, creating shimming mirages on the distant horizon. Sam watched as the settlers went about their routines, unaware of the gathering storm. He had done what he could to prepare them. Now, all that remained was to wait and hope that when the moment came, his skills would be enough to keep them alive. Pre-dawn darkness cloaked the wagon train in shadows, with only dying embers casting a faint glow over the sleeping settlers. Sam Walker sat motionless at his post, the weight of his hidden knives a familiar comfort against the growing sense of danger. The unnatural silence that had troubled him yesterday had deepened into something more ominous. The first scream shattered the morning stillness like a gunshot. Chaos erupted as mounted figures emerged from the darkness, their whoops and hollers mixing with the terrified cries of settlers. Horses reared in panic, wagon wheels splintered under sabotage, and the orderly camp dissolved into mayhem. The attackers moved with practiced precision, herding settlers like cattle and cutting down anyone who resisted. "Nobody needs to die today," a commanding voice cut through the chaos. A tall figure rode forward on a black stallion, his presence bringing an eerie calm to the violence. Silas Kane sat easily in his saddle, a man comfortable with power. His weather-beaten face carried a smile that never reached his eyes. "Now then," Silas continued, surveying the terrified settlers, "let's discuss the price of passage through our territory." His gaze swept the crowd, noting the valuable items already being gathered by his men. The Red Vultures worked with efficient brutality, years of experience evident in their movements. Sam stepped forward from the shadows, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The motion drew every eye in the camp, including Silas's calculating stare. Eli Carter's face contorted with rage at the sight. "Coward," Eli spat. "I knew we couldn't trust you." Silas's smile widened as he studied Sam. "Well, what do we have here? The mighty scout giving up without a fight?" He gestured to his men. "Search him, thoroughly." Two outlaws approached Sam cautiously, roughly patting him down. They found no obvious weapons, leading to raucous laughter from their companions. An unarmed scout. Silas chuckled. These poor settlers didn't get their money's worth, did they? His amusement spread through his men, creating a dangerous atmosphere of mockery and contempt. Among the settlers, young Billy watched with wide eyes, clutching his small knife. The boy's father tried to pull him back, but Billy broke free, determination written across his young face. "Leave them alone!" Billy shouted, raising his slingshot. The primitive weapon seemed pathetic against the outlaws' firearms, but the boy's courage drew admiring glances from the settlers. Silas's smile vanished. "Looks like someone needs to learn respect." He nodded to one of his men. "Kill the boy. Make it slow enough to teach these folks a lesson." The outlaw raised his rifle, grinning wickedly. Time seemed to slow as his finger tightened on the trigger. What happened next would be retold around campfires for years to come. Sam's arm moved in a blur, and suddenly two outlaws lay dead, mysterious blades protruding from their throats. The rifle intended for Billy clattered to the ground, its owner clutching at the knife embedded in his chest. Silence fell over the camp. Silas's face darkened with rage and recognition. Well, the rumors were true after all. "Get the boy back to his family," Sam ordered quietly. Billy scrambled away, his earlier bravado replaced by shock at the sudden violence. Silas raised his hand, halting his men's immediate retaliation. "Take hostages," he commanded. "Choose the young ones. Our friend here needs proper motivation for what's coming." The outlaws moved swiftly, grabbing children and young mothers from the group. Sarah Thompson screamed as they tore Emma from her arms. Billy's family huddled together as outlaws dragged them away, the boy's father fighting futilely against his captors. "You have until sunset to surrender yourself properly," Silas announced. "For every hour you make me wait, I'll send back a finger." He wheeled his horse around, the hostages being roughly loaded into a wagon behind him. As the Red Vultures withdrew with their captives, the remaining settlers erupted in panic and accusations. Eli stormed toward Sam, his face purple with rage. "You knew!" he shouted, jabbing a finger at Sam's chest. "You knew they were coming and you did nothing. If we'd taken the longer route like I suggested, we wouldn't be in this mess," Sam replied, calmly, though his eyes never left the direction where Silas had disappeared. "Those were throwing knives," James Wilson spoke up, his quiet voice carrying authority. "I've seen work like that before, at traveling shows back east." His knowing look made Sam shift uncomfortably. "Who are you really?" Eli demanded. "What? Aren't you telling us?" Sam ignored the questions, instead surveying the damage to the camp. Several wagons had been overturned, their contents scattered across the ground. The dead outlaws lay where they had fallen, their blood staining the prairie. "Grass. We need to salvage what we can," Sam stated. "They'll be back, and we need to be ready." "Ready?" Eli laughed bitterly. "Ready for what? More of your secrets getting people killed?" A woman's sob cut through the argument. Sarah Thompson had collapsed beside her wagon, clutching Emma's discarded blanket. Other parents whose children had been taken gathered around her, their grief and fear palpable. Sam approached them, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm going to bring them back. All of them." "How?" Sarah looked up, her face streaked with tears. "There must be 20 of them, all armed." "Numbers don't matter," Sam replied. "Not with what I can do." The quiet confidence in his voice offered a glimmer of hope to the distraught parents. Eli wasn't finished. He grabbed Sam's shoulder, spinning him around. "No more mysteries, Walker. You owe us the truth." Sam shrugged off Eli's hand. "What I owe you is a chance to survive this. Right now, that means preparing for their return." He turned to address the gathered settlers. "Anyone who can shoot, check your weapons. Everyone else, start gathering the scattered supplies. We're not beaten yet." The settlers hesitated, looking between Sam and Eli. Slowly, they began to move, following Sam's instructions despite Eli's obvious fury. The wagon train's self-appointed leader watched helplessly as his authority crumbled. "I've seen men like Silas before," Sam continued, helping to right an overturned wagon. He's confident, sure of his control. That makes him predictable. And what about you? Eli persisted. Those throws. No one gets that good without a reason. Sam paused in his work, a shadow crossing his face. Everyone has a past, Carter. Right now, mine might be the only thing keeping these people alive. The morning wore on as the settlers worked to rebuild their camp. Sam moved among them, offering quiet advice and assistance. His calm demeanor helped steady their nerves, though questions about his identity continued to circulate in whispered conversations. Billy's mother sat alone by their wagon, clutching her son's slingshot. Sam approached quietly, sitting beside her without a word. He always wanted to be brave, like in those dime novels he reads, she said softly. I never thought... Her voice broke. Courage runs in his blood, Sam replied. He proved that today. Now it's our turn to be brave for him, as... The sun climbed higher, Sam began making preparations. He checked his remaining knives, carefully hidden throughout his clothing. Each blade was perfectly balanced, honed to a lethal edge. The familiar ritual helped focus his mind on the task ahead. Those aren't ordinary hunting knives, James Wilson observed, watching Sam work. I remember a performer years back called himself the Phantom Blade. Could hit any target at 30 paces. Sam's hand stilled. That was a lifetime ago. Was it? Wilson asked quietly. Seems to me those skills came back pretty quick when they were needed. Before Sam could respond, a rider appeared on the horizon. One of Silas's men approached at a gallop, waving a white flag. He pulled up short of the camp, tossing a small bundle onto the ground. A reminder of the deadline, he shouted before wheeling his horse around and disappearing back over the rise. Sam reached the bundle first. Inside was a child's finger, along, with a note written in crude letters. Time's running out. Fury rippled through the settlers. Several men grabbed their rifles, ready to charge after the messenger. Sam's voice cracked like a whip. Stand down. That's exactly what they want, to draw us into a trap. So we just wait while they torture our children? A settler demanded. No, Sam replied grimly. We get smart, we get ready, and then we make them regret ever touching our people. The authority in his voice was unmistakable. Even Eli remained silent, watching as Sam began outlining his plan. The scout's expertise showed in every detail. The positioning of defenders, the preparation of fallback positions, the distribution of their limited ammunition. As afternoon approached, tension mounted in the camp. Sam stood apart from the others, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the Red Vultures had disappeared. The weight of his hidden blades reminded him of promises broken and skills he'd sworn never to use again. James Wilson approached, offering a cup of coffee. The world's a better place with men like you in it, whether you believe it or not. Sam accepted the coffee but didn't respond. His mind was already racing ahead, calculating angles and distances, planning each throw with the precision that had once made him famous. The skills he'd tried to forget were rising to the surface, as natural as breathing. When this is over, Eli said, joining them, you and I are going to have a long talk about trust. If we survive this, Sam replied quietly, you can ask all the questions you want. His tone made it clear he didn't expect to satisfy Eli's curiosity. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the camp as the settlers completed their preparations. Parents of the taken children huddled together, drawing strength from each other. Others checked and rechecked their weapons, knowing that night would bring either rescue or tragedy. Sam made one final circuit of the camp, ensuring everything was in place. The remaining wagons had been arranged in a defensive circle, offering cover for the settlers. Ammunition had been distributed, escape routes planned, and emergency signals established. As the sun began to set, Sam stood at the edge of the camp. His quiet confidence had a steadying effect on the settlers, who watched him with a mixture of fear and hope. Whatever secrets the scout carried, they knew their lives now depended on his mysterious skills. It's time, Sam announced simply. He turned to address the gathered settlers one last time. Whatever happens, remember, you're stronger than you know. Trust in that strength. With those words, he melted into the gathering darkness, moving, like a shadow across the prairie. Behind him, the settlers maintained their vigil, watching and waiting for whatever the night would bring. The weight of his knives was reassuring as Sam moved through the darkness. Each blade was a reminder of his past, of skills honed through years of practice and performance, skills he'd tried to leave behind, but which now offered the only hope for the captured children. As full darkness descended, Sam's keen eyes caught movement on the horizon. Silas was coming, bringing with him the promise of violence and death. But this time, the Red Vultures would learn why some legends were best left undisturbed. The darkness before dawn found the remaining settlers moving silently through unfamiliar terrain. Sam led them away from the devastated camp, his footsteps sure despite the dim light. The events of the previous day had left them shaken, but determined, each person carrying what they could salvage from their wagons. Their quiet progress halted suddenly as Sam raised his hand. Ahead, voices drifted on the morning breeze, Red Vultures scouts searching for stragglers. Sam motioned for the settlers to stay low, then moved forward like a shadow. 3 outlaws had dismounted near a small creek, their horses drinking while they studied the ground for tracks. None of them saw the glint of steel in the pre-dawn light. 3 throws, 3 thuds, and silence returned to the creek bed. Sam's accuracy was chilling. Each blade had found its mark with deadly precision. "Dear God," Martha Jenkins whispered as they passed the bodies. "He didn't even give them a chance to draw. With men like that, you don't give chances," James Wilson replied grimly. "You take them down clean and quick." Eli Carter stared at the fallen outlaws, his face a mix of horror and grudging respect. The kills had been efficient, almost surgical, in their precision. It was becoming clear that their mysterious scout was far more than he appeared. As morning light spilled across the prairie, the group found temporary shelter in a shallow ravine. Sam moved among them, checking for injuries and ensuring everyone had water. His quiet competence helped calm their fears, though questions about his abilities continued to circulate in whispered conversations. "How did you learn to throw like that?" a young settler asked, watching Sam retrieve his knives from the outlaws' bodies. The blades disappeared into hidden sheaths with practiced ease. "Practice," Sam answered simply, but his eyes held a distant look. The weight of memory seemed to press down on his shoulders as he cleaned the blood from his knives. James Wilson sat nearby, warming his hands over a small, carefully shielded fire. "I remember when traveling shows were the biggest entertainment in every town they visited," he said casually. "Folks would come for miles to see the performers, especially the knife throwers." Sam's hands stilled for a moment. The other settlers gathered closer, sensing a story about to unfold. "There was one act in particular," Wilson continued. "Drew crowds bigger than any circus. A man they called the Phantom Blade. Could hit any target, any distance. Made it look as easy as breathing." "That was a different life," Sam said quietly. But Wilson wasn't finished. "People said he could split a playing card at 30 paces, put a blade through a silver dollar without touching the edges. Some claimed he could catch a knife thrown at him and send it right back to whoever threw it." The settlers listened intently, looking between Wilson and Sam. The scout's silence seemed to confirm the old man's words. "What happened to him?" Billy's mother asked softly. Sam stood abruptly, his expression hardening. "We need to move. The outlaw camp can't be far." But the question hung in the air, demanding an answer. Sam looked at the frightened faces around him, seeing their need to understand the man they were trusting with their lives. "There was an accident," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "A throw that went wrong. An innocent person died." His words carried the weight of years of guilt. "I swore after that day I'd never throw again. Until now." The revelation settled over the group like a heavy blanket. Even Eli remained silent, perhaps understanding for the first time the burden their scout carried. Their quiet moment was shattered by the discovery of a body propped against a nearby tree. One of Silas's men, deliberately left for them to find. A crude note was pinned to his chest with a rusty knife. We'll come for the rest. He's trying to break our spirit, Sam explained, studying the scene. This is a message meant to make us lose hope. Is it working? Eli asked, his voice sharp with fear and anger. Sam's response was interrupted by movement in the trees. The group scattered for cover as another band of Red Vultures appeared, searching the area. This time they were better prepared, moving in pairs and watching all directions. What followed was a deadly game of cat and mouse. Sam led the settlers through the underbrush, using every trick he knew to avoid detection. When fighting became inevitable, his knives found their marks with terrifying accuracy. The settlers watched in awe as he moved like a ghost through the trees, each throw bringing down an outlaw before they could raise the alarm. Hours later, they paused to rest in a sheltered grove. Sam took the opportunity to teach basic survival skills, setting snares, identifying edible plants, reading tracks. His knowledge seemed endless, but it was his knife work that fascinated them most. Every blade has its own voice, he explained, to a group of younger settlers. You have to learn to listen, to feel its balance, its weight. He demonstrated with a small knife, sending it spinning end over end to strike a distant tree. It becomes part of you, an extension of your will. As evening approached, Sam decided they needed to scout the outlaw camp. The captive children and their families couldn't wait much longer. He insisted on going alone, but several settlers, including Billy's father, secretly followed him. The outlaw camp sprawled across a small valley, fires dotting the darkness like malevolent stars. Sam counted at least 30 men, with more probably hidden in the shadows. Silas moved among them, his commanding presence evident even at a distance. The hostages were kept in a makeshift pen, guarded day and night. A sharp crack behind him made Sam spin around. Billy's father had stepped on a dry branch, alerting a nearby sentry. Before anyone could react, Sam's knife found the outlaw's throat, silencing him forever. I told you to stay back, Sam hissed, pulling the settlers deeper into cover. They have our children, Billy's father replied simply. Sam's expression softened slightly. I understand, but I need you alive to help them when the time comes. Trust me. They retreated carefully, but not before witnessing Silas training his men. The outlaw leader was preparing for something big, drilling his men in formations and tactics. The hostages watched fearfully, including Billy, whose small face was visible among the captives. Back at their temporary camp, Eli confronted Sam again. This time his anger had a desperate edge. You're going to get us all killed, he shouted. We should negotiate, offer them whatever they want. They want everything, Sam replied calmly. Our goods, our lives, our dignity. Men like Silas don't stop taking until someone stops them. The argument escalated until Eli threw a punch. Sam could have easily dodged or countered, but he stood his ground, taking the hit without resistance. The display of restraint seemed to drain the fight from Eli. As the settlers prepared for another cold night, Sam found a quiet spot to practice. His knives flew with deadly grace, each throw perfect, each blade finding its mark. Billy's mother watched him, clutching her son's slingshot. Why did you really stop performing? She asked quietly. Sam caught his last knife in mid-spin, his face shadowed with memory. I was young, cocky, thought I could do anything with a blade. During a show, I attempted a throw I hadn't properly practiced, showing off for the crowd. His voice grew distant. The knife hit a support beam, ricocheted, a young girl in the front row. He couldn't finish the sentence. It was an accident, she said gently. Doesn't matter. Her family trusted me to perform safely. Instead, their daughter paid for my pride. Sam's fingers traced the edge of his knife. I packed up that night, left the show business forever, swore I'd never throw again. But you're throwing now. To save our children. Because sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes old skills are needed again, whether we want them or not. Sam stood, sheathing his knife. Get some rest. Tomorrow will test us all. The night grew deeper as settlers tried to sleep, haunted by thoughts of their captured loved ones. Sam kept watch, his keen eyes scanning the darkness. In the distance, wolves howled, their cries mixing with the wind to create an eerie chorus. Near midnight, a figure approached Sam's position. It was James Wilson, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You know," the old man said, handing Sam a cup. "That girl's death wasn't your fault. Accidents happen, even to the best." "I made a choice that day," Sam replied. "Chose to show off instead of staying safe. Choices have consequences." "And what about your choice today? To use your skills again?" Sam stared into the darkness. "Different. Choice, different consequences. This time lives depend on these skills. Children's lives." Wilson nodded sagely. "Maybe that's why you were meant to be here. Maybe this is your chance to use your gift for good." "Gift?" Sam's laugh was bitter. "More like a curse." "Depends how you use it," Wilson replied. "Right now, you're using it to protect the innocent. Seems like a gift to me." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the edge of camp. A wounded outlaw had been discovered, trying to spy on their position. Sam approached as several settlers held the man down. "Silas sent me," the outlaw gasped, blood seeping from a previous injury. "Said to tell you he's got plans for those kids. Said to tell you what happens next is on your head." Sam's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Tell Silas I'm coming. Tell him I remember every trick, every throw, every lesson I ever learned, and tell him I'm not performing anymore, I'm hunting." The outlaw's eyes widened with recognition and fear. Sam let him go, watching as he stumbled back into the darkness. The message would reach Silas soon enough. As the night wore on, Sam continued his vigilant watch. His hands occasionally strayed to his hidden knives, checking their position, ensuring each blade was ready. Tomorrow would bring violence and death, but also perhaps a chance for redemption. The weight of his past pressed down on him, memories of that tragic night mixing with fresher images of captured children and grieving parents. He had run from his skills once before, tried to bury them along with his guilt. But now, those same skills offered the only hope for saving innocent lives. Dawn approached slowly, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Sam watched the sunrise, knowing that somewhere out there Silas was watching too. The outlaw leader had unknowingly awakened something that should have stayed dormant, the perfect, deadly accuracy of the phantom blade. This time, Sam's skills wouldn't be used for entertainment. This time, they would serve a higher purpose. As the first rays of sunlight touched the prairie grass, Sam made a silent promise to the captured children and their families. The skills that had once brought tragedy would now bring justice. Morning light filtered through dense tree cover as Sam led the surviving settlers deeper into unfamiliar territory. The previous day's revelations about his past as the Phantom blade hung heavy in the air, but survival took precedence over curiosity. Each step carried them further from the devastated camp and deeper into the wilderness that would either save or doom them all. "Watch where you step," Sam instructed, pointing to subtle signs in the undergrowth. "See how the grass bends here? That's a game trail. Animals always choose the safest paths through rough country." The settlers followed closely, their faces drawn with exhaustion and worry. Many had never ventured this far from civilization, and the wild landscape filled them with equal parts wonder and dread. Sarah Thompson clutched Emma's doll to her chest as she walked, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of her captured daughter. Eli Carter pushed through the group, his face dark with barely contained anger. "This is madness, Walker. We're going in circles while our children suffer." "We're staying alive," Sam replied evenly, noting fresh tracks in the soil. "The Red Vultures know these lands. They'll expect us to take the obvious routes. Our only advantage is doing the unexpected." The morning wore on as Sam taught them essential survival skills. He showed them how to identify edible plants, set simple snares for small game, and find water in unlikely places. His expertise seemed endless, but it was clear these skills had been hard-won through years of wilderness living. See these berries? Sam held up a cluster of bright red fruit. They look ripe and tempting, but they'll kill you within hours. Nature's full of such deceptions. Learning to read these signs means the difference between life and death out here. A woman's scream suddenly pierced the air. Martha Jenkins had wandered slightly from the group and found herself sinking into a deceptive patch of quicksand. Panic spread through the settlers as she thrashed, sinking deeper with each movement. Eli rushed forward, but Sam's arm shot out, stopping him. "Stop! You'll both go under." In one fluid motion, Sam removed his coat and began unwinding a length of rope, hidden within its lining. "Martha, stay still. The more you fight, the faster you'll sink." With calculated precision, Sam threw the rope, its end landing perfectly within Martha's reach. "Grab it, but don't pull. Let us do the work." He and several other men carefully extracted her from the treacherous ground, their movements slow and controlled. As Martha recovered from her ordeal, wrapped in borrowed blankets, Eli's face showed a grudging respect. "You knew that quicksand was there, didn't you? That's why you led us on this seemingly random path." Sam nodded, rewinding his rope with practiced care. "The Red Vultures will expect us to take the easiest route. They don't know these hidden dangers like I do. That's our advantage." The group pressed on, their progress slowed by the difficult terrain. Sam taught them to move quietly, to read the wind, to spot danger before it spotted them. The lessons were harsh but necessary, and slowly the settlers began to understand the wilderness wasn't just an obstacle, it could be an ally. As afternoon approached, they reached a swift-moving river. The water churned angrily between steep banks, its surface broken by hidden rocks. Sam studied the current, his expression grave. "We need to cross here," he announced. "The Red Vultures will expect us to look for an easier crossing downstream. That's where they'll set their ambush." James Wilson stepped forward, leaning on his rifle. "Some of these folks can barely swim in still water, let alone rapids." Sam unwound his rope again, this time revealing it was actually several shorter lengths joined together. "We'll create a safety line. I'll cross first, secure the rope, then help the others across one at a time." The crossing proved treacherous. Sam moved through the water with the same precision he showed with his knives, finding secure footholds among the slippery rocks. Once across, he created an anchor point and began helping others traverse the dangerous current. Halfway through the crossing, a young mother lost her footing. Sarah Thompson plunged beneath the surface, the current threatening to sweep her away. Without hesitation, Sam dove into the rapids. His strong arms wrapped around her as he fought against the current, eventually dragging them both to safety. Sarah coughed up river water. Sam immediately began checking her for injuries. His gentle efficiency reminded the settlers that their mysterious protector was more than just a deadly knife thrower. He was their lifeline in this hostile wilderness. The sun was setting when they finally made camp in a defendable position. Sam worked tirelessly, showing them how to create shelters from natural materials and build fires that produced minimal smoke. His knowledge seemed endless, but there was a weight to it that spoke of years spent alone in the wild. Night brought new dangers. Wolves began circling the camp, their howls growing bolder as darkness deepened. The settlers huddled closer to their small fires, jumping at every shadow. Sam moved silently through the darkness, his knives finding marks in the gloom whenever the predators ventured too close. "The wolves aren't just hunting us," Sam explained during a quiet moment. "They're testing us, looking for weakness. The Red Vultures will do the same." Billy's mother watched him clean his knives after dispatching another wolf. "How did you learn all this? The survival skills, I mean." Sam's hands stilled for a moment. "After the accident at the show, I couldn't face people anymore. The wilderness doesn't judge. Out here, your past doesn't matter, only your will to survive." A sudden commotion erupted at the edge of camp. A Red Vultures scouting party had found them, leading to a brief but intense fight in the darkness. Sam's knives flew with deadly accuracy, while the settlers used their newly learned skills to defend themselves. The attack was repelled, but it left everyone shaken. "They'll be back with more men," Eli said, checking his dwindling ammunition. Sam nodded, already setting traps around the perimeter. "Which is why we need to be ready. The wilderness can be our weapon if we use it properly." Throughout the night, Sam taught them more survival techniques. He showed them how to set complex traps using natural materials, how to move silently through undergrowth, how to use the terrain to their advantage. The settlers absorbed every lesson, their lives depending on this knowledge. Dawn brought new challenges. Sam discovered tracks indicating a larger group of Red Vultures was closing in. He led the settlers through increasingly difficult terrain, using every trick he knew to throw off their pursuers. "Look here," he pointed to a barely visible trail. "They're trying to herd us toward an ambush point. We'll go another way." The new route proved arduous. They crossed streams to mask their scent, used fallen trees as bridges across ravines, and employed every deception Sam could devise. The settlers' trust in their guide grew with each obstacle overcome. Midday brought them to an abandoned outlaw hideout. Sam approached cautiously, his keen eyes noting signs of recent activity. Inside, they found maps and documents suggesting a larger conspiracy. "The Red Vultures aren't working alone," Sam explained, studying the papers. "They're part of a larger network of gangs. That's how they've managed to control so much territory." The discovery added new urgency to their situation. Sam pushed them harder, knowing the stakes were even higher than they'd realized. The settlers responded with determination, their will to survive stronger than their exhaustion. A close call with another scouting party left an injured outlaw alive long enough to recognize Sam. The man's eyes widened with fear as he gasped out his last words. The Phantom Blade. The stories were true. The revelation sparked new whispers among the settlers. Some were afraid, others impressed, but all understood now why Sam had tried to leave that identity behind. "Your reputation seems to frighten them," Eli observed, his earlier hostility tempered by growing respect. "Fear is a weapon," Sam replied, quietly. "But it's also a burden, one I've carried too long." As evening approached, Sam led them to a defensive position in a narrow canyon. The high walls would funnel any attackers into a killing zone, while multiple escape routes offered emergency options. "This is where we make our stand," he announced. "Everything I've taught you, everything you've learned, it all comes down to this moment." The settlers began preparing the position, using their new skills to create natural barriers and concealed firing positions. Sam moved among them, checking their work, offering quiet advice. His calm confidence helped steady their nerves. A quiet moment found Sam sitting alone, methodically checking his remaining knives. Billy's mother approached, holding her son's slingshot. "You're not just teaching us to survive," she said softly. "You're teaching us to fight back." Sam tested a blade's edge before returning it to its hidden sheath. "The wilderness taught me something important. Sometimes survival means standing your ground. Running isn't always an option." The night deepened as the settlers took turns keeping watch. Sam remained alert, knowing the Red Vultures would strike soon. His thoughts turned to the captured children, to Billy's brave stand, to the lives depending on his skills. James Wilson joined him on watch, his old eyes sharp in the darkness. "You know, son, sometimes the past we run from catches up to us for a reason. Maybe your skills weren't a curse after all. Maybe they were meant for this moment." Sam's response was interrupted by distant movement. A group of Red Vultures was approaching, their torches visible in the darkness. The time for talk was over. Now, survival would depend on everything they'd learned. As the settlers moved to their positions, Sam felt the familiar weight of his knives. The skills he'd tried to forget, the identity he'd tried to abandon. They were part of him, for better or worse. And now, they represented the only hope for saving innocent lives. The wilderness had taught him its harsh lessons, shaped him into something more than just a performer. He was a protector now, using his abilities not for entertainment, but for survival. As the enemy drew closer, Sam made a silent promise to the captured children and their families. The skills that had once brought tragedy would now bring salvation. The night wind carried the sounds of approaching horses, of metal against leather, of men preparing for battle. Sam touched the hilt of his nearest knife, feeling its perfect balance. The wilderness had prepared him for this moment, and he was ready. Dawn wasn't far off, but the darkest part of the night still lay ahead. Sam stood ready, the phantom blade reborn not as a performer, but as a defender of the innocent. The skills he'd once cursed had become a blessing, and the wilderness that had once been his refuge would now become his ally in the fight for survival. Moonlight painted silver shadows across the rugged landscape as Sam led a small group toward the Red Vultures camp. Eli Carter moved beside him, their previous antagonism set aside in the face of necessity. Behind them, 3 other settlers followed with the silent determination of men who had left their fear behind. The outlaw camp sprawled beneath them in a natural hollow, firelight casting dancing shadows against canyon walls. Sam counted at least 30 men, their movements suggesting military training beneath their outlaw facade. Silas Kane's presence dominated the scene as he strode between campfires, his confident bearing unchanged by recent losses. "They're too many," Eli whispered, his rifle clutched tightly. "We should have brought more men." Sam's eyes never stopped scanning the camp. More men means more noise, more chances to be spotted. Numbers won't win this fight, cunning will. Movement. Near the center of the camp drew their attention. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man Sam hadn't seen before. His clothes were ragged, but he carried himself differently from the other outlaws. "That's Jack Morton," a settler whispered. "He used to ride with Silas years ago before they had a falling out." "What's he doing here?" Sam studied the newcomer's interaction with Silas. The 2 men argued briefly before reaching some agreement. "He's a prisoner," Sam concluded. "Look at how the guards watch him, but they're keeping him separate from the other captives." The hostages were held in a makeshift pen on the camp's eastern edge. Through his spyglass, Sam could see Billy among them, the boy's small face tight with fear but unbroken. Other children huddled close to their mothers, while the men were kept separately under heavier guard. Morton might be useful, Sam mused. A man with inside knowledge of Silas's operation, and no love for his former partner. Their observation was interrupted by approaching footsteps. Sam signaled for silence as an outlaw patrol passed below their position. One wrong move, one loose stone, would bring the entire camp down on them. After the patrol passed, Sam led them to a new vantage point. From here, they could see the intricate system of guards and watch points Silas had established. It was impressive and revealing. "He's expecting us," Sam said softly. "These aren't random patrols. He's set up specifically to catch someone who knows their way around stealth operations." "He's expecting you, you mean?" Eli corrected. "Your reputation seems to have him spooked." Sam's face hardened. "Good. Fear makes men predictable." They waited until deep night, when even the most vigilant guards grew heavy-eyed. Sam moved like a shadow into the camp, leaving the others to maintain their observation post. His first target was Jack Morton. The former outlaw started as Sam materialized beside him, a knife pressed warning close. "Make a sound," Sam whispered, "and it ends here." Morton's eyes widened with recognition. "The phantom blade," he breathed. "So the stories are true." "Talk. Quietly. What's Silas planning?" "He's using the hostages as bait, but it's bigger than that," Morton whispered hurriedly. "He's made deals with other gangs. They're combining territories, creating something larger. These settlers were just the start." Sam's grip tightened. "How many men does he have coming?" 50 more at least, arriving within days. He's building an army, planning to control all the major trails west." Morton's voice carried the ring of truth. "Get me out of here, and I'll tell you everything. His plans, his weaknesses, all of..." Sam considered the offer. Morton's knowledge could be invaluable, but trusting an outlaw was always dangerous. Before he could decide, a commotion erupted across the camp. Eli had moved from his position, trying to get a closer look at the hostages. His boot dislodged a stone, sending it clattering down the slope. Guards shouted alerts as Sam's knife took down the nearest outlaw with lethal precision. So much for subtlety, Sam muttered, already moving through the chaos. More knives found their marks as he cleared a path toward the others. Eli and the settlers opened fire from their position, adding to the confusion. Silas's voice boomed across the camp. "The Phantom Blade! Find him! 100 gold pieces to the man who brings me his head!" Sam reached the rocky outcropping where Eli and the others had taken cover. "Fall back to the secondary position. I'll cover you." "We can't just leave," Eli protested. "This isn't the rescue. This is reconnaissance gone wrong," Sam replied sharply. "We need to get out now, or none of those children will have a chance." They retreated through the darkness, Sam's knives keeping the pursuit at bay. His throws seemed impossible in the dim light, but each one found its mark with deadly accuracy. The outlaws' pursuit grew more cautious as bodies began to pile up. Dawn found them back at their temporary camp, where the other settlers waited anxiously. Sam wasted no time organizing their defense, knowing Silas would launch a major assault soon. "What did you learn?" James Wilson asked as Sam checked the camp's defenses. "Silas is building something bigger than we imagined," Sam replied grimly. "He's uniting the gangs, creating an empire of sorts. These attacks on settlers aren't random. They're part of a larger plan." Sarah Thompson approached, still clutching her daughter's doll. "Did you see them? The children?" Sam's expression softened. "They're alive, Sarah. Scared, but unharmed. Billy's keeping their spirits up. That boy has more courage than most grown men." As the settlers prepared for the inevitable attack, Sam found a quiet moment to maintain his knives. Each blade was cleaned, sharpened, and checked for perfect balance. The familiar ritual helped clear his mind, allowing him to plan their next move. Eli joined him, his earlier rashness replaced by determination. "I'm sorry about tonight, seeing those children." "I understand," Sam replied, testing a blade's edge. "But we need to be smarter than they are. Emotion gets people killed out here." The morning sun revealed Sam scratching marks on a wooden post, seemingly random lines that nevertheless caught Billy's mother's attention. "You're leaving him a message," she realized. "Teaching him your knife signals." Sam nodded. "Billy's smart. He'll figure it out. When the time comes, he'll know what to do." The day passed in tense preparation. Sam taught the settlers more advanced techniques, how to create diversions, how to move as a coordinated unit, how to use the terrain to their advantage. His instruction was precise, each lesson building on their growing skills. Late afternoon brought unexpected movement from the outlaw camp. A single rider approached under a white flag. Sam recognized Jack Morton, now acting as Silas's messenger. "Silas offers terms," Morton announced, his eyes meeting Sam's briefly. "Surrender yourself, and the children go free." "His word means nothing," Eli spat. "No," Sam agreed. "But his offer tells us something important. He's afraid. The great Silas Kane, afraid of one man with knives." Morton shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "You have 1 hour to decide. After that," he left the threat unspoken. After the messenger departed, Sam gathered the settlers. "Tonight, we end this. Everything I've taught you, everything you've learned, it all comes down to the next few hours." His plan was daring but feasible. The settlers would create a series of distractions, drawing attention away from the hostages. Sam would use the chaos to free the captives while Silas's men were scattered. "What about Silas himself?" someone asked. "Leave him to me," Sam replied quietly. A cold purpose had entered his voice, reminding them that beneath his controlled exterior lurked the deadly precision of the Phantom Blade. As sunset approached, Sam made his final preparations. Each knife was checked one last time, each position verified, each settler clear on their role. The rescue would require perfect timing and coordination. "Why did you really agree to scout for us?" Eli asked suddenly. "You must have known something. Like this might happen." Sam paused in his preparations. "Because running from who you are doesn't change anything. Sometimes the past catches up for a reason." The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Sam stood before the gathered settlers, his quiet authority drawing their attention. Whatever happens tonight, remember, you're not just fighting for yourselves. You're fighting for your children, for your future, for every settler who'll travel these trails after you. Silas and his kind prey on good people because they think good people are weak. Tonight, we prove them wrong. As darkness fell, the settlers moved into position. Sam's training showed in their confident movements, their understanding of terrain, and timing. They were no longer just frightened travelers. They had become warriors in their own right. The rescue began with a series of controlled fires on the camp's perimeter. As the outlaws rushed to respond, more distractions drew them. Further from the hostages, Sam moved through the chaos like a ghost, his knives finding targets with lethal efficiency. He reached the hostage pen to find Billy already working on the locks, using techniques Sam had secretly taught him through the carved messages. The boy's hands were steady, his face set with determination. "Just like you showed me," Billy whispered as the lock clicked open. Sam allowed himself a brief smile. "Good boy. Now help the others." Quietly. The escape might have succeeded perfectly if not for one guard's lucky shot. The bullet caught a fleeing settler in the leg, his cry alerting the entire camp. Chaos erupted as Silas's voice roared commands through the darkness. "Kill them all!" the outlaw leader screamed. "But leave the phantom blade to me." Sam pushed the freed hostages toward the escape route while holding off their pursuers. His knives seemed to multiply in the darkness, each throw finding its mark with impossible accuracy. The legend of the phantom blade grew with each falling outlaw. Silas himself appeared through the chaos, his face twisted with rage and fear. "Face me, you coward! Face me like a man!" A man? Sam's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. A man doesn't torture children to prove his power. A man doesn't prey on innocent families. A knife whispered through the darkness, cutting the gun belt from Silas's waist. Another sliced his hat from his head. The outlaw leader spun frantically, firing blindly into the shadows. "Where are you?" Silas screamed. "I'm justice," Sam's voice replied coldly. "I'm vengeance. I'm the nightmare you created when you chose to harm innocent people." The night erupted in gunfire and screams as the settlers' careful plans dissolved into pure chaos. But Sam's training held true. The freed hostages moved like shadows through the darkness, protected by their families' coordinated defense. In the midst of the battle, Sam finally confronted Silas face to face. The outlaw leader's confidence had crumbled, replaced by the desperate fury of a cornered animal. "Your reign of terror ends tonight," Sam declared, his knives catching the firelight. Silas raised his remaining pistol, but Sam's throw was faster. The gun went spinning into the darkness along with several of Silas's fingers. The outlaw leader fell to his knees, clutching his maimed hand. "Finish it," Silas growled. "You're a killer, just like me." Sam's next knife stopped a hair's breadth from Silas's throat. "No, I'm nothing like you, and killing you would be too easy." The battle ended as swiftly as it had begun. The surviving outlaws fled into the night, leaving their wounded and their leader behind. The settlers emerged victorious, families reunited amid tears and laughter. Dawn revealed the cost of their victory. Several settlers wounded, a few dead, but the children were safe. Sam watched as Billy reunited with his parents, the boy's courage, unmarred by his ordeal. The legend of the Phantom Blade would grow from this night, but Sam knew his deadliest throws had been those that didn't kill, the ones that saved lives, protected innocence, and brought justice to the wild territories. The sun rose over the battlefield. Sam stood apart from the celebrating settlers, cleaning his knives one final time. The skills he had once cursed had become a blessing, allowing him to protect those who needed protection most. The war wasn't over. Silas's allied gangs were still out there, and the trails west would never be completely safe. But tonight had proven that courage and justice could triumph over terror and greed. The settlers had discovered their own strength, and the Phantom Blade had found his true purpose at last. First light painted the mountainous terrain in shades of amber and gold as Sam led the expanded group through treacherous paths. The rescued hostages moved slowly, exhausted from their ordeal, while their families hovered protectively nearby. Behind them, dust clouds on the horizon signaled Silas's approaching men, their pursuit relentless despite their leader's capture. Sarah Thompson carried Emma on her back, the reunited mother and daughter inseparable since the rescue. The girls' fever had returned, adding urgency to their journey. Billy walked beside them, somehow changed by his captivity. His eyes carried a new watchfulness, an echo of Sam's own vigilance. "They're gaining," Eli reported, returning from his rearguard position. His voice carried none of its former antagonism toward Sam, replaced by grim partnership. "At least 30 riders, maybe more." Sam studied the terrain ahead, his expression unreadable. The mountain pass narrows 2 miles ahead. The walls rise straight up, perfect for an ambush. "You mean perfect for them to ambush us," one settler muttered. "No," Sam corrected quietly. "Perfect for us to ambush them." His fingers unconsciously traced the outline of a hidden knife sheath. "But first, we need to get the wounded and children to safety." The group pushed onward, every step carrying them higher into the mountains. Sam's expertise showed in their route, choosing paths that seemed random, but somehow always offered cover, escape routes, and defensive positions. "Watch your footing here," Sam warned as they traversed a particularly treacherous slope. "The rocks are loose, and the drops far enough to kill." Halfway up the slope, an older settler lost his balance. Sam moved with characteristic speed, his hand shooting out to grab the man's collar before he could fall. The rescue was smooth, efficient, but the delay cost them precious time. "The Ready Vultures know these mountains too," James Wilson observed, helping another settler across the difficult terrain. "They've probably got men moving to cut us off." Sam nodded grimly. "Which is why we're not taking the route they expect." He pointed to an almost invisible trail branching away from their current path. "That leads to a cave system. It's dangerous, but it's our best chance." The caves proved to be a maze of narrow passages and sudden drops. Sam led them through the darkness with uncanny certainty, though the settlers could see the concentration etched on his face. One wrong turn could trap them all. "How do you know these caves?" Billy asked, staying close to Sam as they navigated the darkness. "Spent a winter here once," Sam replied shortly, "after the accident at the show. Sometimes the best place to hide is somewhere everyone else fears to go." They emerged from the cave system to find the afternoon sun hanging low in the western sky. Sam immediately noticed signs of recent passage: broken twigs, disturbed stones, a cigarette butt still holding an ember. "Down," he hissed, just as gunfire erupted from the rocks above them. The settlers scattered for cover as bullets kicked up dust around them. Sam's knives found 2 gunmen before anyone could blink, but more attackers appeared on both sides of the narrow valley. "They've split up to surround us," Eli shouted over the gunfire. "We're trapped!" Sam's mind raced through options as he took down another attacker. "The cave behind that waterfall," he called out. "Everyone inside, now." The group rushed for the hidden cave entrance, covered by Sam's deadly accuracy with his knives and the rifles of their better shots. Water soaked them as they pushed through the falling curtain, but the cave beyond offered defensible shelter. "We can't stay here," Martha Jenkins said, wringing water from her skirts. "They'll just wait us out." "No, they won't," Sam replied, already setting up defenses at the cave mouth. "Because we're not staying. There's another exit." The cave proved to be part of an extensive system, with multiple passages branching off into darkness. Sam led them through the twisting tunnels, using marks he'd left years ago to guide their way. "Everyone stay close," he instructed. "It's easy to get lost down here. The passages can play tricks on your mind." They had traveled perhaps half a mile through the caves when the first explosion shook the walls. Dust and small rocks showered down as the concussion echoed through the tunnels. "They're using dynamite," Eli realized, "trying to collapse the caves on us." Sam quickly reorganized their line of march, putting the strongest settlers in position to help the wounded and children. "Move faster, but stay careful," One wrong step down here could be your last. Another explosion rocked the cave system, closer, this time. Cracks appeared in the ceiling, and the settlers' pace became frantic. Sam remained calm, guiding them through the darkness with steady commands and sure knowledge of the path. They emerged into a narrow canyon just as the largest explosion, yet collapsed the cave entrance behind them. The settling dust revealed more red vultures waiting on the canyon rim above. "You led us right into their trap," Eli accused, his old suspicions flaring. "No," Sam replied calmly, already noting positions and angles. "I led them into ours. Before anyone could question his meaning." Sam's knives began their deadly work. Each throw found a target with surgical precision, the blades seeming to curve impossibly in their flight. Outlaws fell from their positions, creating gaps in their line. "Ugh. Now!" Sam shouted. "Everyone move!" The settlers broke for cover as Sam provided protection with his seemingly endless supply of knives. Each throw was calculated, each blade finding its mark with the same accuracy that had once amazed circus crowds. They fought their way through the canyon, using every scrap of cover and every technique Sam had taught them. The Red Vultures' superior numbers meant little in the narrow space, where Sam's knives could control the high ground. As they neared the canyon's end, Eli suddenly grabbed Sam's arm. "We need to talk," he hissed, pulling them both behind a boulder as bullets sparked off the rock. "This isn't the best time," Sam replied, sending another knife into a distant attacker. "Make time," Eli insisted. "Because I'm about to do something you won't like." Sam studied Eli's face, reading the desperation there. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to surrender myself to them," Eli said quietly. "Offer myself in exchange for letting the others go. They know who I am. They know I'm worth more alive than dead." "They'll kill you anyway," Sam stated flatly. "Maybe, but it might buy enough time for you to get everyone else to safety." Eli's face showed grim determination. "I led these people into this mess. Let me help lead them out." Before Sam could respond, Eli broke cover and began walking toward the Red Vulture's position, his hands raised. "Silas sent me to negotiate," he shouted. "I have information he'll want to hear." Sam's knife took down an outlaw drawing a bead on Eli's back. The former wagon train leader didn't flinch at the sound of the body falling behind him. "Keep moving," Sam ordered the other settlers. "I'll handle this." But Eli's attempted sacrifice had already sparked chaos in the group. Some wanted to help him, others to abandon him. The unity they'd built began to fracture under the strain. Sam watched it all, his face showing nothing but his mind racing through scenarios. He'd seen this before. How fear could turn good people against each other. How desperation could destroy the strongest bonds. "Eli thinks he's protecting us," Billy's mother said quietly, appearing beside Sam. "Just like you've been protecting us." Sam's hand tightened on a knife hilt. "There are better ways to protect people than throwing your life away." The Red Vultures seemed uncertain how to handle Eli's approach. Their gunfire slackened as they discussed the situation, giving Sam the opening he needed. Moving like a shadow, he circled behind their position. His knives struck with deadly precision, creating confusion in their ranks. By the time they realized what was happening, Sam had cleared a path to Eli. "Your negotiation skills need work," Sam said dryly, pulling Eli back toward cover as bullets kicked up dust around them. "I had to try something," Eli gasped as they ran. "We can't keep running forever." "No," Sam agreed. "We can't." They rejoined the main group, now huddled in a defensible position near the canyon's exit. The settlers' faces showed exhaustion and fear, but also determination. They had come too far to give up now. "We make our stand here," Sam announced. "The canyon walls will funnel them into our killing zone. Every lesson I've taught you, every skill you've learned, this is where it pays off." The settlers moved with practiced efficiency, setting up defensive positions and preparing the few weapons they had left. Sam's training showed in their movements, in their understanding of angles and cover. "Billy," Sam called softly. The boy approached, his young face serious. "Remember what I taught you about knife signals?" When Billy nodded, Sam continued. I need you to teach the others. Quickly. As Billy shared his knowledge, Sam prepared his remaining knives. Each blade was checked, balanced, made ready for what was coming. His fingers moved with the same precision that had once entertained crowds, but now served a deadlier purpose. They're coming, James Wilson reported, his old eyes still sharp. At least 40 of them. Sam nodded, unsurprised. They'll try to overwhelm us with numbers. Don't let them. Use the terrain, use your training, and most importantly, use your heads. The attack began with a thunderous fusillade of gunfire. Bullets sparked off rocks as the settlers huddled in their positions. Sam's knives answered, picking off the most dangerous shooters with lethal accuracy. The battle settled into a deadly rhythm. The Red Vultures would probe their defenses, looking for weaknesses, and Sam's knives would discourage them. But ammunition was running low, and even Sam's supply of blades wasn't endless. As the sun began to set, tension in the group reached a breaking point. The wounded needed attention, children were crying, and fear began to overcome training. We should try to negotiate, someone suggested. Maybe offer them money? They don't want money, Sam cut in sharply. They want to break us, to prove that they can take whatever they want, whenever they want. Then what's your plan? Eli demanded. Because right now, all I see is us dying slowly instead of quickly. Sam's response was interrupted by movement at the canyon's entrance. A group of Red Vultures had worked their way around to their rear, cutting off their escape route. We're surrounded, Martha Jenkins whispered, fear finally cracking her voice. Sam surveyed their situation, his mind calculating angles and possibilities. The settlers watched him, waiting for the solution that had saved them so many times before. There's still a way, he said finally. But you're not going to like it. He gathered them close, outlining his plan in quick, precise terms. Each person's role was defined, each movement choreographed. It would require perfect timing and absolute trust. This is insane, Eli protested. It'll never work. It will work, Sam replied with quiet confidence. Because it has to. As darkness fell, the settlers prepared for their most desperate gambit yet. Sam moved among them, checking positions, adjusting angles, ensuring everyone understood their part. Remember, he told them, fear is a weapon, but it can cut both ways. Tonight, we teach them to fear us. The moon rose over the canyon walls as Sam took his position. His remaining knives caught the silvery light, each blade promising death to any who threatened his charges. The legend of the phantom blade had been born in a circus tent, but it would be forged anew in this canyon. Shadows lengthened across the canyon floor as Sam positioned the settlers according to his desperate plan. The narrow walls rose like prison, bars against the darkening sky, hemming them in with Red Vultures on both sides. But Sam had turned the confined space into an advantage, using the terrain to magnify their defensive capabilities. Everyone clear on their positions? Sam asked, his voice carrying quiet authority. The settlers nodded, their faces showing determination despite their fear. Each person held their assigned role in memory, knowing the slightest mistake could doom them all. The Red Vultures had grown cautious after their earlier losses, maintaining their distance while tightening their encirclement. They'd learned respect for Sam's deadly accuracy with his knives, but their numbers promised eventual victory through attrition. Sam moved silently through the settlers' positions, checking their preparations one final time. The traps were set, simple but effective mechanisms using the natural features of the canyon. Loose rocks were positioned to create avalanches, tripwires made from unraveled rope lay concealed in strategic locations, and carefully balanced stones waited to be triggered. Remember, Sam instructed, timing is everything. Wait for my signal. Billy watched from his assigned position, clutching the knife Sam had given him. The boy's eyes never left his mentor, ready to relay signals to the other settlers as they'd practiced. His recent captivity had left him with a maturity beyond his years. James Wilson finished distributing their remaining ammunition among the better shots. Not much left, he reported grimly. Maybe 20 rounds each. Make them count, Sam replied. When the shooting starts, aim for the horses first. Unhorsed men are slower, more cautious. Sarah Thompson huddled with Emma behind a rock formation, her daughter's fever finally broken, but leaving the girl weak. "What if this doesn't work?" she whispered. "It'll work," Sam assured her, though his eyes never stopped scanning the canyon walls. "Because we're not just fighting for ourselves anymore. We're fighting for every settler who'll travel these trails after us." The tension mounted as darkness crept into the canyon. Torches flickered to life among the Red Vultures' positions, creating deceptive shadows that danced across the rock walls. Sam used the uncertain light to his advantage, positioning settlers to create misleading silhouettes. Eli approached Sam, his earlier attempt at sacrifice replaced by grim determination. "They're moving into position," he reported. "Looks like they'll try to rush us from both ends." "Good," Sam nodded. "That's exactly what we want them to think." His fingers traced the edges of his remaining knives, each blade checked and rechecked for perfect balance. A voice called out from the darkness, carrying notes of arrogance and frustration. "You can't hold out forever, Phantom Blade. We've got 50 men to your 20, and more coming." "Numbers mean nothing in the dark," Sam called back, his voice seeming to come from multiple directions. "Ask the men I've already killed." The psychological warfare continued as both sides waited for the inevitable clash. Sam had taught the settlers to use sound to their advantage, creating uncertainty about their numbers and positions. Small stones were dropped at irregular intervals. Whispered conversations carried just far enough to be heard, but not understood. Martha Jenkins finished arranging a series of small mirrors they'd salvaged from the wagons. When the torchlight hit them just right, they created the impression of movement where there was none. "Your reputation won't save them," the outlaw voice taunted again. "The great Phantom Blade, reduced to protecting peasants. How far you've fallen." Sam's response carried deadly calm. "I'm exactly where I need to be. Why don't you come a little closer and find out how far I've fallen?" The outlaw's first probe came from the eastern end of the canyon, a dozen men advancing, slowly, using rocks for cover. Sam let them get halfway to the settler's position before launching his counter. 3 knives flew in rapid succession, each finding its mark with lethal precision. As the outlaws scattered in confusion, Billy relayed Sam's hand signals to the other settlers. A carefully prepared rockslide thundered down the canyon wall, cutting off the attackers' retreat. The real attack began moments later, a coordinated rush from both directions. Horses charged through the narrow space as rifles blazed from multiple positions. The settlers responded with disciplined volleys, their limited ammunition used precisely as Sam had taught them. What followed was a masterclass in defensive warfare. Sam seemed to be everywhere at once, his knives striking from impossible angles, while his voice called out instructions to the settlers. Each blade found its mark with devastating effect, sowing chaos in the outlaws' ranks. The Red Vultures' charge broke against the settlers' prepared positions. Horses stumbled on hidden tripwires, riders were unseated by well-aimed shots, and Sam's knives eliminated key leaders with surgical precision. "Fall back and regroup," someone shouted from the outlaws' lines. The command was cut short by one of Sam's blades. But the Red Vultures had numbers on their side, and they pressed their attack with desperate determination. A group of outlaws managed to reach the settlers' outer defenses, leading to close-quarter fighting. Sam moved through the chaos like a deadly shadow, his remaining knives finding vulnerable spots with unerring accuracy. The skills that had once entertained crowds now served a higher purpose, protecting innocent lives from those who would destroy them. "Keep them bunched up," Sam called out as he ducked under a wild swing and dispatched the attacker. "Use the canyon walls to your advantage." The settlers fought with everything Sam had taught them, using terrain and teamwork to counter the outlaws. Superior numbers. Young and old worked together, covering each other's weaknesses, becoming something stronger than they'd been before. Billy proved his worth, relaying Sam's signals quickly and accurately. The boy's courage inspired others, showing that even the youngest among them could contribute to their survival. The battle reached a crucial point as dawn approached. The Red Vultures had lost nearly half their men, but the settlers were running dangerously low on ammunition. Sam had only a handful of knives left, each throw now requiring careful consideration. Then a new voice cut through the pre-dawn darkness, one that made Sam's blood run cold. "Enough games, Phantom Blade," Silas Kane's commanding tone carried, clearly despite his recent wounds. "Face me one-on-one, or I start killing hostages." Sam's eyes narrowed as he spotted Silas on a rocky outcropping. The outlaw leader had escaped custody during the chaos, and now held a knife to a settler child's throat. "Last time didn't work out so well for you, Silas," Sam called back, already calculating angles and distances. "Want to lose the rest of your fingers?" "Big words from a man who hides in the shadows," Silas sneered. "The great Phantom Blade, afraid to face me in the open." Sam stepped into a clearing, his movement deliberate and controlled. "Let the child go, Silas. This is between us." "Drop your knives first," Silas demanded. "All of them." Sam slowly began removing his knives, each blade placed carefully on the ground. The settlers watched in tense silence, understanding the sacrifice he was making. "All of them," Silas repeated, "including the ones hidden in your boots and sleeves." As Sam disarmed himself, Eli whispered urgently, "You can't trust him." "I don't," Sam replied quietly, "but sometimes you have to take risks to protect what matters." When Sam finally stood unarmed, Silas pushed the child aside but kept his knife ready. "Now we settle this like men. No tricks, no throwing knives. Just you and me." "You never could fight fair, could you, Silas?" Sam's voice carried a trace of pity. "Always needing an advantage, always threatening the innocent." Silas's face contorted with rage. He charged forward, his knife slashing in deadly arcs. Sam moved, with the fluid grace that had made him famous, dodging each attack with seemingly effortless precision. The two men fought across the canyon floor, their combat a deadly dance in the growing light. Silas's fury made him dangerous, but Sam's calculated movement saved his energy for the right moment. "You're nothing without your tricks," Silas panted, his attacks growing wilder. "Just a circus performer playing at being a hero." Sam didn't waste breath on replies, focusing instead on wearing down his opponent. Each dodge brought him closer to his discarded knives, though Silas failed to notice the subtle positioning. The decisive moment came when Silas overextended himself, putting too much force into a thrust. Sam twisted aside, his foot hooking one of his dropped knives into the air. The blade seemed to float for a moment before Sam caught it and sent it spinning toward Silas in one smooth motion. The knife took Silas in the shoulder, sending him staggering backward. Before he could recover, Sam had retrieved two more blades. "Impossible," Silas gasped, clutching his wounded shoulder. "Nobody's that fast." "I told you before," Sam replied calmly. "I'm not performing anymore." The next few throws were too quick to follow. Silas's remaining weapons went flying as Sam's knives found their marks with surgical precision. The outlaw leader fell to his knees, disarmed and defeated. "Finish it," Silas screamed, his face a mask of hatred and fear. "Prove you're just another killer." Sam retrieved his last knife, testing its familiar weight. "No," he said finally. "Killing you would be easy. Living with the consequences of your actions. That's your real punishment." The remaining Red Vultures, seeing their leader defeated, began to surrender or flee. The settlers moved quickly to secure those who laid down their weapons, while others pursued the fleeing outlaws just far enough to ensure they wouldn't return. As the sun rose fully over the canyon walls, Sam surveyed the aftermath of battle. The settlers had won, but victory had come at a cost. Several were wounded, though thankfully none fatally. More importantly, they had proven themselves stronger than anyone, including themselves, had believed possible. Billy approached Sam, still clutching the knife he'd been given. "What happens now?" the boy asked. Sam knelt to meet his eyes. "Now you help rebuild. Help your people become stronger, wiser. Remember the lessons you've learned here." The settlers began gathering their wounded and salvaging what they could. The canyon that had nearly become their tomb had instead become the birthplace of something remarkable, a community forged in adversity, strengthened by shared struggle. Eli approached Sam as the others worked. "I was wrong about you," he admitted. "We all were." "You were right about one thing," Sam replied. "Trust has to be earned. I hope I've done that." As morning light filled the canyon, the settlers prepared to move on. Their journey wasn't over. The Western Territories still held many dangers, but they were no longer the same people who had started this journey. They had become stronger, more resilient, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Sam watched them prepare to leave, his remaining knives cleaned and restored to their hidden sheaths. The skills he had once seen as a curse had become a blessing, allowing him to protect those who needed protection most. The legend of the Phantom Blade would grow from this day, but it would be different now. Not a story of circus performances and trick shots, but a tale of justice, protection, and the triumph of ordinary people over those who would prey upon them. As the settlers moved out, Sam took one last look at the canyon that had seen their greatest trial and triumph. The morning sun caught the edge of a knife blade as he turned to follow, ready for whatever the trail might bring. Morning sunlight bathed the valley in golden hues as the wagon train finally approached their destination. 3 months had passed since the battle in the canyon, and the settlers had transformed from victims into survivors. Their wagons still showed signs of the ordeal, patches where bullets had struck, repairs from rough terrain. But like their owners, they had endured. Sarah Thompson stood at the valley's edge, Emma healthy and strong beside her. "It's beautiful," she whispered, taking in the fertile land spread before them. Other settlers gathered around, their faces showing wonder and relief at finally reaching their journey's end. Eli Carter studied a worn map, his leadership style notably different from when they'd started. "This is it," he confirmed. "The survey markers match. This valley is ours." The settlers began their descent into the valley with renewed energy. Their movements showed the confidence gained through hardship. Even the children walked with purpose, their eyes constantly scanning their surroundings as Sam had taught them. Billy, riding beside his father, carried himself differently now. The scared boy who'd left civilization months ago had been replaced by someone more aware, more capable. Sam's knife remained at his belt, a reminder of lessons learned and courage found. As the wagons formed their final circle in the center of the valley, James Wilson called everyone together. The old man's eyes were bright with emotion as he addressed the group. "Before we begin building our new home," he announced, "we have a debt to acknowledge. Many of us wouldn't be here if not for one man, a man who taught us to survive, to fight, and most importantly, to believe in ourselves." All eyes turned to Sam, who stood slightly apart from the group, his quiet vigilance unchanged by their victory. The settlers had come to understand his reserved nature wasn't coldness, but a deep sense of responsibility. "We need to honor that debt," Wilson continued, "and I have an idea how." Over the next weeks, as the settlement took shape, Wilson's idea became reality. Billy, who had shown remarkable skill with woodworking, began carving a statue. It depicted a figure in mid-throw, a knife balanced perfectly in its hand. The boy worked tirelessly, determined to capture every detail he remembered of Sam's distinctive stance. The settlement grew quickly, with houses and shops rising from the virgin soil. The settlers applied the same determination that had kept them alive on the trail to building their new home. They incorporated Sam's lessons into their design: clear lines of sight, defensible positions, multiple escape routes. Sarah Thompson opened a school, teaching not just reading and writing, but also the survival skills they'd learned. Her curriculum included special lessons on knife throwing, though none of her students could match the accuracy they'd witnessed in the canyon. Martha Jenkins, whose brush with quicksand had taught her the value of knowledge, started a library. Among its first books was a carefully written account of their journey, ensuring the story would be preserved for future generations. Word of their victory over the Red Vultures spread through the territories. The tale grew with each telling: how an unarmed scout had turned out to be the legendary Phantom Blade, how he'd trained simple settlers to defeat a hardened outlaw gang. The story attracted other settlers to their valley, each seeking the safety and strength the community offered. One morning, about 6 months after their arrival, a rider approached the settlement. The sentry, using observation techniques Sam had taught them, recognized Jack Morton, the former Red Vultures member who'd helped them during the rescue. "Thought you'd want to know," Morton reported to the town council. Silas Kane faced trial in Fort Smith. He'll never threaten another wagon train. The news brought closure to many, though some noted that other dangers still existed. The territories were vast, and there would always be those who preyed on the vulnerable. But the settlement had become a beacon of hope, proving that ordinary people could stand against such threats. Meanwhile, Sam's journey had taken him to a small town 50 miles east. After ensuring the settlers were safely established, he'd moved on, uncomfortable with the attention his reputation brought. He found work as a blacksmith, the precise skills needed for blade crafting transferring naturally to the forge. In his spare time, Sam taught knife throwing to local children, though now he emphasized safety above all else. The accident that had once driven him from performing became a cautionary tale, teaching students to respect their abilities and use them responsibly. Years passed, and the settlement in the valley prospered. Billy grew into a respected scout, using the skills Sam had taught him to guide other wagon trains safely through dangerous territories. He carried Sam's knife always, its blade just as sharp as the day it was given to him. The statue Billy had carved became the centerpiece of the town square. Over time, settlers added a plaque that told their story, not just of the battle, but of the transformation from frightened travelers to confident pioneers. Children would gather around it in the evenings, listening to elders recount the tale of the phantom blade. One autumn day, 15 years after the settlement's founding, a familiar figure rode into town. Sam's hair had grayed somewhat, but his movements retained their fluid grace. He'd intended to pass through quietly, but Billy spotted him from the trading post. Word spread quickly, and soon the town gathered to welcome the man who'd made their community possible. Children who'd grown up hearing the story stared in awe at the real-life legend. Parents pointed out details to their kids: the way he moved, the hidden sheaths that still held his knives, the watchful eyes that never stopped scanning for danger. Billy, now a grown man with children of his own, approached his old mentor. "I've been hoping you'd return," he said, holding out the knife Sam had given him. "My son's about the age I was. I thought maybe—" Sam studied the boy who stood beside Billy, seeing the same curiosity and determination he'd recognized years ago. "The blade's still balanced perfectly," he noted, testing its weight. "You've taken good care of it." "You taught me well," Billy replied. "We've all tried to live up to those lessons." Sam spent several days in the settlement, watching how his teachings had taken root and grown. The children's knife-throwing practice was conducted with proper safety measures. The town's defenses were well maintained, its citizens alert but not fearful. They'd found the balance he'd always sought, between capability and responsibility, between strength and wisdom. During his stay, Sam visited the statue in the town square. The carved figure captured his throwing stance perfectly, though he noted that Billy had added something to the expression, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere accuracy. "You've made it more than it was," he told Billy as they stood before the statue. "No," Billy disagreed. "We made it what you always meant it to be. The phantom blade isn't just about hitting targets anymore. It's about protecting people, teaching them to protect themselves." The settlement faced a new challenge that year as drought threatened their crops. But the community's response showed how deeply they'd absorbed Sam's lessons. They worked together, adapting their farming techniques, supporting those in need, finding creative solutions to survive the crisis. Sam watched their efforts with quiet pride. The skills he'd taught them had gone far beyond knife throwing and survival tactics. They'd learned to face challenges with courage, to think creatively under pressure, to stand together against adversity. Before leaving, Sam spent time with Billy's son, teaching him the basics of knife throwing. The boy showed natural talent, but more importantly, he showed the same deep respect for the skills that his father had learned. "Remember," Sam told him, "these skills are like any tool. Their worth depends on how you use them. Your father understood that. It's why he became a protector instead of just a fighter. The legend of the Phantom Blade continued to grow, but it evolved beyond tales of circus performances or deadly accuracy. It became a story of transformation, how one man's skills had helped create a community of survivors, how tragedy had led to redemption, how ordinary people had found extraordinary strength within themselves. Travelers passing through the settlement often asked about the statue in the town square. They'd hear different versions of the story, but certain elements remained constant. The mysterious scout, the deadly outlaws, the settlers who refused to remain victims. Sam's influence spread beyond the settlement's boundaries. Other communities sought out their expertise in defense and survival. The skills he'd taught became part of a larger legacy, helping to make the territories safer for all travelers. Years later, when Sam finally settled permanently in the town he'd helped create, he found peace in seeing how his past had been transformed. The skills he'd once seen as a curse had become a gift, passed down through generations not as weapons, but as tools for building and protecting communities. The accident that had driven him from performing was no longer a source of shame, but a lesson in responsibility, teaching future generations to respect their abilities and use them wisely. The Phantom Blade had become more than a performer's stage name. It had become a symbol of protection, wisdom, and the strength found in community. As Sam watched the sun set over the valley from his small cabin, he could hear children practicing their throwing techniques in the distance. Their laughter carried on the evening breeze, free from fear, secure in the knowledge that they were part of a community that could protect itself. The legacy he'd helped create wasn't just about physical skills or survival techniques. It was about the transformation of fear into confidence, of isolation into community, of victims into protectors. The settlers who'd once huddled in their wagons, terrified of outlaws, had become the foundation of a thriving community that helped others find their strength. And so the story of the Phantom Blade became more than just a tale of deadly accuracy or circus performances. It became a legend of redemption, of second chances, of ordinary people discovering their extraordinary potential. The knife thrower who'd once entertained crowds had found a greater purpose, teaching others not just to survive, but to thrive. But here's a question for you. What would you have done in Sam Walker's position? Would you have buried your talents and lived with regret? Or used them to protect the innocent, knowing the cost that comes with such power? If this story of the Phantom Blade caught your attention, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of justice, redemption, and legends from the Old West. Let me know in the comments what kind of stories you'd like to hear next, whether it's about mysterious gunfighters, unlikely heroes, or other forgotten legends waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, remember, sometimes the deadliest force isn't the gun at your hip, but the ghost they never see coming.